President Obama certainly laid out his strategy to defeat ISIS tonight. Will it work, though? Joining us now, Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona. He's a CNN military analyst, former U.S. military attaché in Syria. Paul Cruikshank is here, our CNN terrorism analyst, the co-author of a great new book, Agent Storm, My Life Inside Al-Qaeda and the CIA. And back with us, Lieutenant General retired Mark Hertling. Basically, the president's strategy, 4 points. I'll put it up on the screen. Airstrikes in Iraq and Syria, arming fighters on the ground, counterterrorism efforts, humanitarian aid. Rick Francona, what do you think? Militarily speaking, how long realistically is it going to take for the U.S. military to say mission accomplished?
A long time. And I was glad to see that the president included both Syria and Iraq in his planning, because many of us were concerned that we were going to see an Iraqi piece of this and a Syria piece of this. And I hope that we do this as ISIS, as one group, because they don't recognize that border, and neither should we. That said, and I think General Hertling talked about this in great detail earlier, the Syria piece is going to be the real problem. The Iraqi piece is going to be difficult enough. It's the Syria piece that's going to be a real problem, because if getting people on the ground in there is going to be very difficult. Finding anybody that's going to be willing to fight ISIS that we can trust is going to be very, very difficult.
What about all the Arab neighbors out there? Anybody in that part of the world, General Hertling, realistically ready to send combat boots on the ground to defeat ISIS?
I think there will be, Wolf. Certainly the Jordanians are going to provide some intelligence capability. There are going to be several forces, which we probably shouldn't name, that are going to supply special operations forces, which have been training with Americans in very many exercises, not only the ones from the Middle East, but also from Europe. So I think, yes, I think that's going to be one of the key efforts. As your bullet points pointed out, those are elements of the strategy, but the two things we also need to talk about is the will of the coalition that's built to see this through, but also the building of the will of the American people to continue to support this, not just today, but in the future.
Paul Cruikshank, I've spoken with counterterrorism experts inside the government, outside the government. They make the point in various forums, for every action, there's a reaction. So the United States tonight, the president declared war, in effect, on ISIS. They're going to respond. Will they respond with terrorism against U.S. interests in the American homeland?
Tonight, the United States may be crossing a red line for ISIS. Certainly if it gets involved in Syria, that's their stronghold. And ISIS may do what it hasn't done yet and really sort of train these Western recruits that they have, up to 1,000 Westerners, many of them Europeans, train them for terrorist attacks back in the West. I don't think there's a threat this week or even this month, but in 3 to 6 months, this group could mount a terrorist plot against the West, perhaps even the United States. It's got really quite frightening capability. It's got training camps on a scale last seen in Taliban-run Afghanistan, tens of millions of dollars, experienced bomb makers that can train these Western recruits. So a lot of concern that by going after ISIS, dealing with this long-term threat, you're creating a bigger short-term threat.
Well, what do you make of that? That's pretty chilling, Rick Francona. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's the problem. And most of these camps are going to be in the Syria area, because ISIS is not stupid. They know that we're going to focus on Iraq first and then Syria later. And Syria, as I said, presents the bigger problem. So Paul's exactly right. So we have got this short-term problem that we have to address. And I don't know if we do that with airstrikes in Syria right away, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. I think the president was quite clear on that. So I think there's this window of opportunity for ISIS to get some kind of operation mounted, and I think that that's our vulnerability right now.
If it might not happen anytime soon, airstrikes in Syria, General Hertling, is it because the U.S. doesn't have good enough intelligence now to launch these precision airstrikes, whether Hellfire missiles from drones or F-16 fighters or F-18s or whatever, because the U.S. is fearful that a lot of innocent civilians could be killed in the process?
Well, I think that's certainly a great big part of it, Wolf. The precision strikes, and I think that was part of the president's language as well, that he said the way he was planning on having the military attack is when the targets come. When you go into Syria, I think he really wants to get the strategic targets, the key leaders, and that's all driven by intelligence gathering on the ground. He's not going to go in, as we sometimes used to say, called plinking targets, small tactical targets. It's got to be the big ones when we go into Syria. We can continue to fight in Iraq against all kinds of tactical and operational targets, but it's the strategic targets that are important.
Mark Hertling, Paul Cruikshank, Rick Francona, guys, Thanks very much. We'll take a quick break. More right after this.